they're keystone herbaceous plants. And we always talk about oaks being keystone plants, and that's certainly true. But not everyone can plant an oak. Maybe not everyone has the space for it. But I think most home gardens could squeeze in a goldenrod somewhere.
In today's episode of the Backyard Ecology Podcast, we're talking with Sam Hoadley. Sam is the manager of horticultural research at the Mount Cuba Center, where he evaluates native plant species, old and new cultivars, and hybrids in the trial garden. Hi, Sam. Welcome back to the podcast.
Shannon, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you back again because some of our listeners may remember you from some of our previous episodes where we've talked about caryxes, which are the sedges, and veronias, which are the ironweeds. And today, it's going to be so much fun because we're going to talk about another genus of native plants that's a major natural ecosystem powerhouse and one of my many favorites. I've got lots of favorites. One of my many favorite genera. And that's the Solidago, or the goldenrods.
Yeah, no, it was an incredibly fun trial. And I think it's a really inspiring group that hopefully we can get people excited about to plant more goldenrods in their home landscape. It is hard to imagine, well, there's a handful out there that get close to goldenrod and maybe one or two that surpass them. But in terms of ecological value that a group of plants can provide to your home landscape, goldenrods are unbelievable. We certainly saw tons of insect activity in the trial garden, whether it was insects visiting the flowers, caterpillars eating the foliage, and there was all kinds of bird activity as well. They're just an incredible group of plants.
Yes, and that's one of the exciting things about goldenrods is that it's not just the pollinators. It's not just the insects. It is everything uses goldenrods pretty much.
Yeah, no, like they're keystone herbaceous plants. And we always talk about oaks being keystone plants, and that's certainly true. But not everyone can plant an oak. Maybe not everyone has the space for it. But I think most home gardens could squeeze in a goldenrod somewhere. There's tons of different kinds, various sizes, habits, forms, bloom periods. They're something we said all the time in the trials. There's a goldenrod for any home garden, any condition. They're an incredibly diverse and incredible group of plants.
Yes, exactly. And it's that diversity which is so cool. And I know when I was in college and taking all my wildlife biology courses and botany courses and field botany courses, a lot of times my instructors, and I had some amazing field botanists and systematic botanists for instructors, but they were like, okay, goldenrods are really hard to identify, especially your field goldenrods that everybody's so familiar with that turn everything yellow in the fall, all those big fields. They're like really hard to identify, so you have to take them into the lab with the flower, put it underneath a dissecting microscope, and count the little pieces of them. And those aren't really the ones that we're talking about so much, because those field goldenrods, they're amazing in the field.
Absolutely.
But they don't really do well in the home gardens.
Yes, I think there's definitely, right plant, right place.
Yes.
Some of those field goldenrods, ecological value off the charts. They're wonderful in a naturalistic landscape. In fact, if you are looking to kind of have a plant that will quickly colonize a natural area in the back 40 of your garden, maybe it'll even push back against invasive plants, there's some goldenrod species that are incredible candidates for that setting. But for your small home landscape, or maybe real estate is at a premium, you may not want to unleash Solidago altissima and canadensis in your small home garden. But again, there is a place for those plants. They're wonderful. Every goldenrod is incredible. But there's definitely quite a large number of species that are really well adapted to a small home garden. They're more well-behaved, if you will. We actually found that we evaluated 70 different goldenrods, and we found that only about 6 or 7 of them are what we would classify as aggressive or unruly in a small home landscape, which really kind of, I think, was unexpected by a lot of us. I think there is this perception that goldenrods are aggressive and weedy and maybe aren't the best for a small home garden, but there's plenty of candidates that are really well suited for those kinds of gardens.
Right. And we'll talk more about those different species specifically in a little bit. But one of the things, too, that I found was really interesting about the goldenrod booklet that you guys have, and you can get it
Yeah.
online too.
Yep.
But one of the things I
Exactly.
loved about it, besides the species descriptions, was the wonderful job that you did here of showing all the different parts of the goldenrod. Because if anybody's ever tried to identify the different goldenrods, especially if you're not using one of the picture apps,
Right.
which don't always do the best job. I mean, there's some that do a pretty good job, but a lot of them,
Yeah.
goldenrods can look very similar. There's a reason why my professor said, take it in the lab,
That's
look
right.
underneath the thing.
That's right.
And if you look at any of those keys or any of those really hardcore goldenrod field guides, and if there's a whole lot of jargon, and there's
Mm-hmm.
pieces and parts to them. And
That's
those
right.
pieces and parts to those flowers don't look the same at all stages of the flower and the seed head. And
Right.
so that picture, I think, did an amazing job of showing what you're supposed to be looking at different phases of the picture. So, I mean, that was just one of those odd things that I was not expecting. I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah. No, we have a lot of fun putting those together, and sometimes we do want to use those jargony words and to take the deeper dives. We're not necessarily like a botany textbook. Like we're not necessarily setting out to help you key out a plant. We're more kind of laying the groundwork. So if you did want to take that next step, if you wanted to take the deep dive into goldenrods, and we all know that there is a deep dive that can be taken, that you have the tools, and you understand what tools are necessary to take that dive. So we kind of, this is more of like a setting the stage part of the report, so we can introduce some of these terms, some of these anatomical features that might come up again and again in later parts of the report, and people can kind of familiarize themselves with some of those pieces of the flowers, so we can refer to those, whether that's later in the report or on the online content, or just to kind of set you up for success if you're going into one of those more intensive keys.
Yeah, I really appreciated that and loved that from somebody who has tried to do those deep dives. And honestly, unless you use those terms all the time,
Right.
it's like every other word I'm having to flip back to the dictionary, and that just like blows your brain, and there's no fun
Yes.
doing that.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of fun making those. And just a quick teaser, this isn't goldenrod related, but we are writing a milkweed report, which will be out in January, and we're working on a very similar page, or maybe multiple pages, looking at all the anatomical features of milkweed flowers, which are fascinating. So stay tuned for that.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, it's great.
So let's start talking about some of the ways that goldenrods fit into the ecosystem.
Hmm.
Let's just kind of start off by setting the stage of the ecological importance of the Solidagos that we've kind of alluded to and talked about. And it's really great because, like I said, it's not just one little group, it's everything that's using, and it's using them. Things use goldenrod not just when it's in flower,
Right.
but throughout the growing season, and then even throughout the winter too, potentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We saw wildlife activity from spring through winter in the goldenrod trial, and it was one of, I mean, in addition to all insects we observed visiting the flowers, eating the foliage, it was one of the best places to see warblers during the fall, because they were visiting those plants, they were picking off the insects that the goldenrods were attracting. And one of the other things that was really amazing about that trial, is, you know, in addition to the diversity of these plant sizes and the rhizomatous habit versus clumping habits and foliage texture and all of that, there's also a lot of diversity in when these plants produce flowers. We actually had our first goldenrods blooming in mid-May, which is unusual. It's definitely an exception to the rule, but Solidago cutleri grows in alpine habitats in northern New England and upstate New York. Bloomed very, very early for us, and there were insects visiting those flowers during May and early June. And then we kind of got into the meat of the goldenrod season. June, July, there's some early species, but August, September is really kind of peak bloom for us. We even had flowers in October and November in the trial garden. These various species, if you choose them strategically, you can have goldenrod flowers. Maybe May is the exception, but from June through November in your home garden. And during that time, you are going to have insects just off the charts. We saw just about everything you can imagine visiting those flowers. I would say the minority of insects that we observed would be like the large charismatic butterflies, but we saw bees, bugs, beetles, just everything. It was really, really an incredible array of insects that were visiting those flowers. gathering nectar, gathering pollen. We also saw insect predators on those flowers as well, picking off those insects that were visiting those flowers, whether it was ambush bugs or Carolina mantises. Just the diversity was amazing. And just the number as well of insects that we were observing was some of the highest we've ever observed in the trial garden. Often we present our data and the average number of insects we're observing per minute, which is generally our frequency, or excuse me, the duration of time that we're observing these plants on a daily basis. And the average was above anything else we had seen to date. We had plants that were attracting upwards of 5 insects per minute on average. That incorporates cold mornings, and incorporates hot afternoons. And we had one goldenrod in particular that attracted, I think it was upwards of 12 insects on average per minute, which is on a single inflorescence that we were observing that activity. So just incredible, the amount of value that these plants are producing, the amount of insects these plants are bringing into potentially your home landscape, and those insects equate to food for other wildlife, including those warblers. And it doesn't stop there, as you mentioned. Those flowers produce seed, and we would see juncos and sparrows all winter long feeding on that seed. Mammals as well. I'm sure we would see rodents, and maybe some rodents we weren't thrilled to have in the garden, but that rodent is potentially food for hawks, owls. So this is really a keystone plant that is the building blocks of this entire food chain that you can start in your home landscape. And in addition to insects and birds, we saw plenty of caterpillar species feeding on the goldenrod foliage, and these are really, truly keystone plants. It's hard to imagine many other plants that can provide this amount of ecological value to your home landscape, and there's so many of them, and I would challenge anyone to include at least one goldenrod in your home landscape, but maybe 3, 4, 5, half dozen. But yeah, they're great plants.
Right. And the timing's important too.
Right.
With them, because if we're just looking at the nectar resources and the pollen resources, so the flowers, I mean, they bloom in the fall when you've got a lot of our migrating fall insects, which aren't just monarchs. So we always think about the monarchs, but there are other migrating insects as well. So a lot of those are using it. Or it might be the last resources available.
Right.
Or some of the last resources available going into winter for the late season bees and next year's queen bumblebees.
Exactly. We actually did track bumblebee activity in the trial garden, and it became, at least our observations started to really peak in September and October, and we even saw them into November, right up until the bitter end, until those last flowers were being produced. We saw bumblebees coming to these goldenrod flowers. And some of the most visited goldenrods in the entire trial were those that were really late blooming, those October and November bloomers. And I think maybe if all things were created equal, if those plants produce flowers at the same time as most of the other goldenrods, that kind of peak season of late August and September, we may have seen similar numbers on everything, but these flowers are blooming at a time when there's so few other floral resources. They really are this important last season, or really late season, some of the last floral resources that are available. And bumblebees were certainly one of the most visited or most counted insects during that time of year.
Quick question. Do you think Backyard Ecology content is at least as valuable as one bottle of soda per month? If so, please consider becoming a financial supporter to help us continue producing all of our free content. It doesn't take much if we all work together. Even the equivalent of everyone who hears this contributing just $2 to $3 per month, or the cost of one soda per month, would allow us to produce a year's worth of videos, blogs, podcasts, newsletters, and our other free content. I'll have links in the description for how you can contribute. And if you've already contributed, thank you so much. We appreciate your willingness to help us provide free educational content about plants, pollinators, and wildlife that can be found in our yards and communities.
We've got a lot of old fields on our property.
Sure.
About half of our property is old fields. And so goldenrod galore.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets up into the yard and stuff, and because it's the field goldenrods that are the aggressive rhizomatous ones, the ones that go by runners. Mm-hmm. And we don't mow the grass. We're off. You don't have to. Nobody sees it but us, so we don't mow the grass all the time. And there's been times when we've let the goldenrod grow and pot and spots and stuff, or maybe we'll let it grow and then that's getting a little weak, so we'll mow it down in that area of the yard, and then let it grow up later. And by October, November, like you were saying, that which was mowed is now blooming after
Right.
everything else that's out in the fields has died off. And yeah, always have bees galore on it
Hmm.
when we do that.
Yep. I think that's, I mean, it's a similar thing you can even do in your home landscape. And people talk about the Chelsea chop all the time as a great way to kind of reduce the size and the branching of some of these plants and make them a little more shrubby. But oftentimes, when you do the Chelsea chop, you're also delaying the bloom period, which is, I think, sometimes can be used as a strategy to prolong your bloom period of your garden overall. And sometimes what I recommend doing is instead of Chelsea chopping all of your goldenrod, maybe Chelsea chop a third of it. So a third of those plants will bloom for a longer and later period of time, and you will kind of extend the duration of those floral resources in your garden. So similar outcome to that mowing, just on a smaller scale.
And we don't want to Chelsea chop everything or mow
Right,
everything
right.
because we do have pollen specialist bees for
Yes,
goldenrods, just like we do with a lot of other different plants and genera. But yeah, those pollen specialist bees, they rely on those flowers being available at a certain time. So if we're delaying them, we may be delaying it too late for those specialists to use it. Other things will still use it, but not the
sure.
things that need it and can't
Right.
eat anything else for the larva.
Yep.
So yeah, doing that maybe a third, like you suggested, of the Chelsea chop, or like I said with ours, it's just mowing what comes into the yard and then letting it bloom later, versus doing the whole fields.
Yeah, no, we looked a little bit at specialist activity with the ironweeds, with the Melissoes denticulatus, which I know we talked about before, and goldenrods. There's many specialists. We didn't get into that level of detail in this trial, but again, goldenrods are known to host some of the most pollen specialists of any genera in the eastern temperate forest region, which is also incredible. And again, many of those insects are reliant on that resource at a very specific time. So if you're really interested in supporting those specialists, I think finding those local genetics, growing those locally native species that are blooming in sync with those locally native insects, that's really the best way you can support those specialists in your home garden as well.
And then, I mean, like you were saying, so many other things too. You've got beetles of all kinds on there, and moths, and oh, the like you said, the praying mantises. I mean, there's just so many cool things
Mm-hmm.
that are on the goldenrods. Oh, and the goldenrod crab spiders. Those are some of my
Yes,
favorite
they're very,
spiders.
very cool. Yep. Yeah, they blend right in. They're incredible. And we even saw caterpillars feeding on the flowers themselves that would blend perfectly in. They would turn to that beautiful golden yellow. It's just, again, the closer you looked, the more you'd see just these tiny little beetles as well that would be inside of the flowers themselves, those inside the flower tubes of these teeny, tiny little disc flowers. Um, just amazing.
And I guess we should, since you're mentioning disc flowers and we talked about all the different parts, mention that when we talk about goldenrods, I mean, it's easy to think of goldenrod flowers as that big flower head,
Sure.
but that's actually an inflorescence made up of lots of different flowers.
Right. Yeah, many little heads are capitula inside that capitulescence or that big inflorescence. And if you look at one of those little tiny heads, it looks like the tiniest little sunflower. It's complete with ray florets, which look like little petals. Your disc florets, again, if you just miniaturized a little sunflower, that's exactly what you would look like. There are one or two, or one goldenrod in particular, that doesn't have those ray florets, but the vast majority of them do. Unlike ironweeds, which just have the disc florets, they don't have the petals at all. But yeah, if you with a hand lens, you can just kind of unlock this miniature world of beauty that goldenrods have. And of course, they're beautiful big flowers, kind of in your face, these yellow inflorescences. But I would encourage you to take a really detailed, zoomed in look at those flowers. They really are stunning.
Yes. Goldenrods can definitely become addicting. The more you
Yes.
look at them and the more you see, because it's like all the different insects that are on there. And then the more you look down, it's smaller flowers and all the insects that are inside of those that you didn't
Mm-hmm.
notice. And oh yeah, it's just absolute. They're addicting. You
They
can keep
are.
going down further and further and further.
I know. I feel like they're like Carex that way. It's just such a big, diverse world, and you can take that deep dive. And I feel like there's always more to learn, which is it's really fun working with these larger genera because it just seems like what you can learn is truly inexhaustible. There's something new you'll see every single day. There's a new species you'll learn about that wasn't in the trial. And I should mention that the trial was not an exhaustive look at the genus. There was many species we weren't able to incorporate in the trials. But I think of the 70 plants we had in the evaluation, it was a pretty good look at some of the diversity in the eastern temperate forest region. But there's so much more out there.
Oh, yes. And then, I mean, again, we've gotten into talking about the flowers because that's a big showy part.
Right.
But then when we think about what happens afterwards, after those flowers bloom, after most of the seeds have been eaten and it's fall and it's winter, they still keep providing a lot of shelter and food because
Absolutely.
there's all kinds of insects inside of or on the stem, either on the stem or in the stem a lot of times. And so that's winter shelter, overwintering shelter for them. But then the birds come in.
That's right. Yes. We were always hopeful that we would see some gulls, some of those insects that are nesting inside of those stems over the winter in the trial garden. We never actually saw any develop, at least the stem gulls, but we do have them in our natural lands. And we have some really wonderful stands of Solidago altissima and Solidago gigantea, where you do see those really beautiful spherical gulls that are produced on the stems of those species. And in addition to it just being kind of an interesting thing to see in winter, an unusual texture, that little grub is inside of that gall. And what's really cool is that is providing food, especially for woodpeckers during the winter months. And they'll go to that gall. They know there's protein inside during the coldest months of the year, and they'll pick those grubs right out of there. Those goldenrods just seem to continue to give to wildlife throughout the season. And a fun fact, something I didn't know, is that those grubs are even used by ice fishermen up north during the winter months when it's not easy to dig for worms or anything like that in the ground when it's frozen. But those grubs are there above ground. They can open them up and use those grubs as bait, which is something kind of a fun fact we learned during the research for the report.
Oh yeah, and I've heard that the goldenrod apple galls.
Yes.
There's a good reason why you didn't find them on the plants in the trial garden, because they're pretty specific to which goldenrods that they'll use.
Gotcha. Very
so
cool.
It's only in those tall field goldenrods that you find them. So
that makes sense.
That's why having that diversity is so important.
Right.
But then it's also, we love watching the birds go after them.
Yes, absolutely.
But there's also parasitoid wasps that will go after them. So then you've got that whole other layer of insects going, and a whole deep dive that you could go there. And then there's another one. I'm forgetting what the name of it is, but there's another type of gall, insect that makes a gall, and that's the one where you get all the leafy stuff at the top.
Yes.
So you have the goldenrod apple gall, which is looks like the little bobber or the apple on the stem.
Right, exactly.
And then you've got the leafy stuff up at the top, and that's a different insect entirely that's making those.
It's the little bunch galls, right? The little midge that does that. Yeah, they're fascinating. We saw something similar to that in the trial garden, although I've seen more of that even at home on Solidago rugosa, those little bunch galls at the growth tips. They're so unusual. We did open up a few to try to get pictures, but the insect had already emerged. But again, just a whole nother layer of what's going on in the landscape. And if you look closer, you'll see all these really specialized interactions with goldenrods, even in a home landscape. If you have the right plants as well.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating how many different ways you can go about and look at this.
Yes.
You just keep going deeper and deeper. And then, of course, if you've left things standing so that the birds can go up and down the stems and eat everything, that's also going to be providing shelter too, because the goldenrods don't fall down quite as quickly as some of the other plants do. So that's kind of like a lot of our native grasses don't fall down as quickly. So that's places that the birds can get up and hide underneath and have shelter from some of the winter storms.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, some of the taller, more rhizomatous species are some that have some of the sturdiest stems, at least in the evaluation, and really The stems remain rigid, they remain upright, and if you cut them at the right time of year, they can also provide that habitat for cavity nesting bees, especially some of plants like Solidago gigantea, altissima, so a lot of the field species you were mentioning. They can be really viable habitat for stem nesting bees and wasps.
Again, not the species that we would recommend for a
Right.
small garden on 1/10 of an acre up next
Right.
to the house.
That's right. That's right.
But
But yeah,
if
if you have the space, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And then, like you said, there are goldenrods that really fit pretty much any type of location or habit or conditions that you've got out there. I mean, there's really open, sunny field goldenrods. Again, not the ones that you want to plant most of the time in your yard.
Right.
I keep wanting to repeat that because I don't know how many times I've had people go, oh, there's a field next door to me. I can go gather some seeds and just plant those in my, and no, you don't want
Right.
that. You're not going to want that. They look great in the fields, not in your yard.
Yeah. Chances are they'll find their way over anyways, without your help.
True.
But yes, no, there's definitely, again, right plant, right place.
Yes.
But yeah, there's definitely, there really truly are goldenrods for every garden location, whether you have dry soils, wet soils, sun, shade. If you only have room for like a small container, or if you really have a bigger garden bed, or even a huge open field, there is a goldenrod that will fit just about every home garden. Thanks to those species diversity and habitats that these species can be found in the wild. It's just amazing.
Yes. And that's one of the things that really surprised me too. When I was first really learning about goldenrods is goldenrods are supposed to be sunny,
Right.
but there are shady goldenrods. And so
Yes.
everybody's always looking for that shady plant. There are species of goldenrods that look gorgeous and do wonderful in shade.
Yeah. No, it's a great way if you only have shade at home, if you're looking for ways to increase the pollinator value of your woodland garden. There are several goldenrod species that are incredible candidates, and many of them are fairly commercially accessible as well. I will say in the trials, they got a little bit of an unfair shake in the evaluation because we had to plant everything in full sun, just the way the trials were set up. But we did try to give them a little bit of extra attention because several of those species that didn't do well in the trials because it was too sunny for them in that location, we know they're wonderful garden plants. We use them extensively in our naturalistic gardens at Mount Cuba Center. We find them even in the natural lands at Mount Cuba. Plants like Solidago casea or blue stem goldenrod, Solidago flexicalis, even plants like Solidago patula. These are incredible plants for the shady home garden. A few of those species can handle dry shade as well. Like Solidago casea is a really good candidate for drier locations in shade. Plants like Solidago patula like a wetter spot in shade. But they're all incredible ways to brighten up your garden if you only have shady landscapes, and to also increase the wildlife value of your woodland garden. Or if you have a little bit of both, of sun and shade, you can have an even broader diversity of goldenrods in your home garden.
Yes, the Solidago casea, the blue stem goldenrod.
Yeah.
I'm planting a lot of that underneath I'm starting a new shade bed garden that I've been working on, and it's 2 maple trees.
Yeah.
So dry shade.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Deep dry. I mean, there's shade and then there's maple shade.
Mm-hmm.
This is maple shade.
Yep.
And I'm putting it
shade.
underneath there, and it's doing gorgeous there, along with some of our fall asters as well.
Yeah. No, and they look great with asters. You can mix them with ferns and sedges. They're just an incredible addition to a shady home garden. And casea, I think, is one of the best. And we evaluated another species that's really similar called Solidago curtisii. Tends to be more of a mountain plant, has a little bit of a larger species than Solidago casea, but very similar idea in terms of these long arching stems that often are kind of that blue to even black in color. We did find curtisii was a little bit more sun tolerant, but handles shade just as well as casea. So another one to kind of keep an eye out for, but several of those species are very, very shade tolerant and actually prefer it.
Yes.
Are you a fan of Backyard Ecology? Do you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our content, announcements, or other fun stuff we have planned? Then be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Each week, you will receive a helpful email from us with tips, stories, upcoming events, and our newest content, all conveniently packaged in a way that will take less than 5 minutes to read. I will have a link in the description for how you can join the thousands of others who have already subscribed to our free newsletter.
And I mean, we're talking about native plants too, or native plants here as like native plants to, what was your definition of it?
Oh, native plant, Eastern Temperate Forest region.
Okay.
While we generally promote our results to the Mid-Atlantic region specifically, we do source plants from basically the eastern half of the United States. There's a few reasons for that. One is that we want to have as broad a look at that genus as possible, or that group of plants. But if a plant is commercially available, if you can get that plant at your garden center, we would like to be able to tell you whether that's a worthy investment or not, whether that's worth putting in your home garden. If it's not locally native, we'll do the testing for you. We'll see if it works. But we do also focus on locally native species. We have had a really good mix of local genetics as well as commercially sourced plants that are from maybe not so local of a habitat or a location where that plant is originally found or found in the wild. It's a really kind of a big, broad net of plants that we do bring into the trial garden.
But yeah, I would encourage people to really look for the species that, one, fit your conditions, because
Right.
it's not going to grow if it doesn't fit your conditions. And then two, to pick the species that are native to where you are, because that's going to give you the best results in the long run, probably. Rather than, I mean, yeah, you could get this species or that species, but when you're having to choose between the two, because nobody has unlimited space,
That's right.
the native species is native to where you live is going to be the better choice. Even if there's another species that's native to the Eastern Temperate Forest,
Right.
but isn't native to where you live. It's the different scales here. Just like with goldenrods, you can dive so deep. Native plants
really
still, you can also go really deep with.
Yes, and if you're listening from the Mid-Atlantic region, we do have a page in the report that is Mid-Atlantic specific. So we have coastal plain native species, Piedmont native species from this region. If locally native is important to you and your goals in your landscape, there's a little bit of a resource there. We also have a sortable Excel file on our website that you can go through, kind of regardless of the trial performance. We have information on those plants, those species, and where they're found in the wild, and you can make lists for yourself based on your gardening conditions. So if you're saying, okay, I only have dry sandy soils, I have full sun or shade, you can make lists for yourself of goldenrods that'll work in your garden specifically, and then you can cross-check that with some of the species that are locally native to you, if that's, again, your goal, and you can get a really good list of plants that will work for you. And the research reports are really just showing you what works well in those average garden conditions in the Mid-Atlantic region, but it is so much more than that. I think you can use our research to inform any number of decisions based on any number of gardening goals.
Oh, yes. And that's one, I was really, really excited to see that eco-region specific table for the Mid-Atlantic. I was excited to see that. I think that's the first time you guys have done that.
Yeah, we're trying to do more of that kind of thing. We really want to have results that anybody can use. And people's various goals will change depending on what they're trying to do, what they're gardening for, how local is local, in terms of what they want to include in their home landscape. So we're really trying to have a little bit of something for everyone. And we're really, I would say the trials really started off as being very horticulturally driven. So the larger horticultural, like garden industry, it was kind of like, for the home gardener, not really too focused on what was locally native or plants that were really well suited to restoration. But with the goldenrod trial, we had results for plants that we think can do the home garden perfectly well, but also maybe really well suited for restoration projects. And what we were finding with some of these species is, even when they're really well suited to both of these worlds, some of these species just aren't very commercially available. So that was something we kind of endeavored to change at the end of this evaluation, was to try to get some of these species that in some cases were extremely locally native to us out into the commercial world, so the home gardener could put it in their landscape, but also it could make these species available to the restoration practitioners as well, so these species can get back in the landscape in a bigger scale and to be appropriately sited. in the Mid-Atlantic region. So it's a newer thing for us, but it's something we're starting to lean into more and more with some of our more recent trials.
And I love seeing that and seeing how it's evolving and everything's evolving with those trial gardens. And the one thing that I've absolutely love and find so valuable and that you've been doing for a while, and I love it, is that Excel spreadsheet. Every time you guys do a trial report now, I'm like downloading it, and I'll use it even for myself to try and get those ideas of some of the things that might work in a drier setting or a wetter setting or sunny or shadier that I might not be familiar with those species. And then I'm going back and seeing, okay, is that really native to here or not?
Right.
But it gives me that first sort. And it's a whole lot easier to go to Excel spreadsheet that you guys have already put together and do that first sort through than for me to have to go through and find every species myself and then find that same information and do the sort. So I really appreciate you guys making that available in the way you do that.
Of course, it's all about helping people make informed decisions. So we're not trying to push anyone in any one direction. I think anybody's garden goals are equally valid, but we're just trying to help people get access to good information and make good choices about plants that will work in their landscape, and they'll hopefully have success with their plants, success in bringing wildlife to their home garden, and then hopefully want to plant more native plants to bring in more wildlife. So that's the hope.
And I think you guys do a really good job of that too. And so, yeah, you guys have just recently released, at the beginning of the year, the Solidago report, and you evaluated, what was it, 50 plants or 50 or 70 species?
We evaluated 70 different goldenrods. I think the species count came to about 50. Now, the reason for that, there was a few cultivars, a few hybrids, and a few selections of some of these species where we did try to have the selection as well as a wild type plant presented, but about 50 species total of the overall 70 plants that we evaluated.
Yeah, and you looked down for 3 years in your trial garden. So yes, this was Mid-Atlantic. Yes, this was medium, average, normal soil for you guys.
Yeah.
Which may not be medium, average, normal soil for anybody else.
That's right.
Georgia, this is not medium, average soil for you.
Right. A little different. Although I will say some of these plants, one in particular, it's been tested in different locations. Richard Hockey at Chicago Botanic Garden tested Solidago rugosa fireworks there as well, which actually was selected from eastern North Carolina. And that plant was incredible in our trials. It was incredible in Chicago. This is just a plant that seems to do well just about wherever you put it. I don't know about northern New England or the deep south, but some of these plants are just incredible. I think some of them are going to be a little bit more finicky on where you put them, maybe a little bit more locally adapted. But I think that's part of the fun of trying these things. If you are outside of the Mid-Atlantic region, try some of this stuff, see if it works. And some of these species are pretty widespread. They have large ranges, and we may have only had the Mid-Atlantic form or collection of that species. But if you lived in New England, maybe see if a local nursery is growing that local form, same in the southeastern United States, and see if that same species will perform well for you. It's really kind of fun to do those little trials at home as well.
Yeah, and with goldenrods, it's, oh my gosh. I don't want to go too deep into it because it's mind-blowing, but again, you can go so deep into goldenrod. How deep do you want to dive with them? But some of these species that have really wide native ranges, the genetics variation between those is huge.
Yeah.
And not just like genetics as in, oh, it might get 5 feet here and 3 feet there, 6 feet there. Not that sort of I would consider a normal genetic variation. But Solidago genetics is like crazy insane. You can have one species, and depending on where you are in the country, so different populations that are geographically distinct. One population may have 2 sets of chromosomes. One set may have 4 sets of chromosomes, and one other population may have 6 sets of chromosomes. I mean, it just like, no. It just gets insane. So again, for ecological purposes, trying to get not just native species to where you are at, those locally native species, but also, when possible, and it's really hard to do this, get the local genetics or as local as
Right.
possible, it's probably going to give you better results, both ecologically and just growing in your garden, because they're going to be more adapted to that area. Now, it's really hard to get local genetics for many species. That's a given.
Yeah.
Like
It's
I said,
tough.
when
Yeah.
possible, do what you can. But it's also kind of fascinating knowing that genetic variation is there.
It's actually something we're trying to look into in more detail with some of our upcoming trials, like Pycnanthemum and even blue stem, our blue stem trial with the Schizocariums, Andropogons, sampling some of these species at various latitudes, even some of these really widespread species like little blue stem. It's native to a huge swath of the eastern United States, and its performance, at least in a common garden setting, which is what we're looking at in the trial garden, varies dramatically in the size of that plant and when that plant flowers. And that is something that we've seen again and again in terms of the phenology of these plants. When you take a plant from the deep south, the southeastern United States, if it was collected in South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, when we bring those genetics up and compare it to our mid-Atlantic forms, it often blooms much, much later than our local forms, and is later to emerge in the spring. And sometimes they are so different that I would imagine a specialist that is adapted to our local forms of these species, is timed with their bloom period, might not even be able to access the value that that southern plant is providing. And the same thing goes for plants that are sourced from northern populations, except they bloom much earlier than our local forms. That's something we're seeing again and again in these evaluations. And I would say that it's sometimes, like you said, it's difficult to find those local genes. And sometimes when you're buying that straight species, there's not a lot of information that comes along with where that plant came from in the wild. And that can be tricky, but we can really, I think, as consumers, we can start to demand a little bit more transparency of nurseries in terms of where those plants came from, where that seed was collected, how it was grown, all of that good stuff. But I think I think things are getting better. It's improving, and in terms of availability of local genetics. But I think as consumers, we can be pushing the envelope a little bit more and hopefully creating a better consuming environment where you can get some of these plants a little bit more easily.
Right. Because, I mean, and this starts to get a lot more complicated too, because like with the Solidagos especially, like there's a lot of genera that do this, but Solidagos especially are really well known to hybridize.
Yes.
When you get those species that are overlapping ranges and blooming at the same time.
Right.
They hybridize a lot. So again, I mean, this kind of goes to what you were saying a little bit before, is everybody's got different values and reasons why they're doing this. If you're just doing this because native plants are trendy and you want to have native plants, okay, great. You can tune out of this part of the conversation.
Right.
But if you're doing it for the ecology, because this is Backyard Ecology Podcast,
right,
and thinking about those pollinators and the wildlife that uses it and the plants themselves, then how might this hybridization impact things in the long term? Is a good question, I think, to ask. And I don't think anybody has that answer.
Right.
And 5-10 years ago, when I first heard people starting to ask this question, like routinely, some of the botanists and researchers and scientists, my initial thought was, oh, that's going to be one or two plants out there. So that hybridization, the genetics are going to get swamped. It's not going to be that big of a deal unless you're putting it like into a restoration.
Right.
But native plants are taking off. More and more people are trying to do this. And that's exciting and that's wonderful. But that compounds that question, the potential problem that we don't know what unintentional consequences it could be.
Right.
And right or wrong, I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I think it's a question we have to start thinking about and asking, if we're doing it for the ecological reasons, to create those homegrown national parks, to help the pollinators, help the wildlife. And like you said, you give the information with the reports that anybody can go and find out the broadscape stuff. And then it's up to us as individuals to say, okay, I like the species. Is it native to where I live? Or is it not? Because just because it grows in your area doesn't mean it's native. I mean, I've got a friend that lives 45 minutes from me, and he bought cliffside goldenrod, or there's a bunch of different common names for it, Drummondii, Solidago Drummondii, at a native plant sale from a native plant nursery in Kentucky. It's not native to Kentucky.
Right.
It's native to Missouri and a little bit of Arkansas.
Right.
But he loved it because it was growing so well in this rocky area.
Yep.
One of his main front garden beds looked gorgeous there. And he asked me one time, about a year after he planted, he's like, "Oh, this is going so wonderfully. Why don't you ever talk about it, Shannon?" I had a small native plant nursery at the time. And he's like, "Do you guys need some seeds? It'd be great for you to grow." And I was like, "Well, it's not native here," which he was really surprised about too. And I was surprised when he said where he got it from too, that they were selling that one. But yeah, it was gorgeous.
Yeah. Where
he was at. We had the conversation about hybridization. He was like, "Well, I'll watch it and stuff." But then within 2 years, the second year, it had spread so much that he started pulling it out. By the third year, he was ripping everything out because it was like taking over his garden beds.
Wow. Yeah.
Because it liked it so much in that area. And that's when he was like, yeah, maybe this isn't the one that needs to be growing in my garden, for my area, because of those other deeper issues. But yeah, you've kind of got to, it's questions that we're only just now starting to even think to ask, I think. I mean,
yeah. No, I think it's a really valid point, and I think I would say that when we're talking about some of these plants, growing them outside of our range and cultivars, hybrids, these are perhaps plants that are best suited for the suburban home garden, for even like a garden in a city where you are relatively isolated from any natural habitats, any like truly pristine, unmodified natural areas. And the goals of that landscape might be very, very different from a restoration site where we're encouraging locally native, local ecotype plants, seed grown. That's the priority. We certainly would not plant Solidago Drummondii out in our natural lands. Although it actually ended up being a really good plant in our trials as well, in terms of being a well-behaved goldenrod. I think there are certain areas where you could use it, but this is, again, right plant, right place. We wouldn't be planting this in a restoration setting. As you mentioned, southeastern Pennsylvania, northern Delaware is a very different place from Missouri. And taking these plants out of their natural habitat, bringing them to the mid-Atlantic region, they can behave differently. So it's something that you do have to think about, especially if you're thinking about where you're gardening, where your garden is located. It's complex. I think this whole conversation is very deep. It's complex. There's a lot of nuance to it for sure. And I think there's a lot of things that we're starting to think about that I think are really, really important considerations that you've been mentioning.
And like you said, just like the trials start out more from a horticultural perspective, right, and then are now evolving and developing. I think that's where a lot of the native plant growing and the native plant gardens is doing. They started out a lot of horticulture. Yeah, they bring in a few more butterflies, and that's something wonderful, and it feels good. But now they're starting to evolve into that deeper thing. And that's where I think our thinking is starting to evolve as well, and the questions that we're asking and thinking about those goals. So yeah, I'm not trying to make it sound like it's good or bad. It's just kind of like raising those issues, because sometimes you don't even think to ask those questions. And then somebody says it and it's like, oh, yes.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, that kind of squirreled off, but I think it's a good squirrel.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's I don't know. I like when organic things happen, and it is important to talk about. So I think in terms of how we assemble the trial, like you almost feel like a collector. Like it's like you want one of everything. You want to just try all this stuff. And I think there are times when, as gardeners, we can be guilty of that too, where you're just interested. You want to learn about these plants. And I truly believe like the best way to learn about a plant is to grow it and to observe it, and to watch it. But but I think maybe sometimes it's not that simple in terms of really what is the most beneficial thing to do, especially when we're talking about wildlife. But then the other side of it too, I think about like where I garden at home. There's nowhere around me that is an intact natural area. It is, the world around me is suburbia. It has so changed. There's no remnant prairies. There's no remnant old growth woodlands. It is as human changed as it can possibly be. And in that kind of area, I do think of these things on a spectrum. Like, well, Solidago Drummondii is a heck of a lot better than butterfly bush, or, I mean, that's an extreme example, but I think it is complicated. But if I lived next to a restoration area, like think about the serpentine barrens up by us all the time. There's this incredibly rare habitat. It is loaded with rare species that only occur in these tiny little pockets of serpentine rock. And I think I would be pretty nervous about planting a plant like Solidago Drummondii near that. Because that, to me, sounds like a habitat where Solidago Drummondii might escape and make itself right at home. So I do think you have to look around you and think about where you live, the consequences of what might happen if that plant escaped. I always talk about non-native plants in a similar way, because I think that, generally I say it's not a cardinal sin to include a non-native plant in your home garden. I think we do just have to think about those plants as our responsibility. If we do start to see that plant behaving in a way that we think could cause ecological harm, if we're starting to see it seed around in places we don't want it to, or to spread, I think it is our responsibility to remove that plant when we start to see those tendencies. And I rarely hear people talk about native plants in that same way. But I think there are, or native plants in the broadest sense. But I think it's something that we need to think about. That again, I rarely ever hear addressed and discussed. But I think there are cases where we need to be thoughtful and considerate and observant. I think that's really the biggest thing. Like your friend seeing what Solidago Drummondii did, that's great. That's an example of someone being observant, recognizing there's a problem, and acting before things maybe got out of control. But yeah, it's again complicated. There's nuance. It's difficult, but it's really interesting too.
Yeah, exactly. And complicated and nuanced is exactly the way I look at it, because yeah, I've always thought the same thing too, is that I would much rather somebody plant a species of Solidago,
Right.
or Picanthinum, your mountain mints, or Veronia, your name whatever it is, native to North America,
Right.
or native to the eastern U.S. that
Yep.
isn't native to your specific location, than to plant something like a butterfly bush, or because that semi-native is going to do at least more good than
Right.
the other, at least
Yep.
more initial good. But the more I get into it and the more I think about it, it's like I start, like you said, it gets to be complex and complicated. And I don't want to make it so, because I start thinking about, but how close is too close to a natural area?
Right.
And
Yep.
how far does it spread? And you get to start thinking about, and you can get so lost in the weeds. And I don't want to make
You
it
can.
so complex or so nuanced or lost in the weeds that people like tune out. No, it's too much,
Yeah.
and
No.
to back away from native plants at all. So yeah, it's finding that balance. But I think there is a place to ask these questions, and I think we're getting to the time where, like you said, we're not talking about it in the same way. And I think we're getting into that time where it's an important conversation to start having and to start raising that question and that awareness a little bit.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think one of the strengths of the trials is to make this information accessible and to make people feel like, okay, I can take my first step into gardening with native plants, and I can feel empowered to do that. And maybe it's also one part of our responsibility to start having people ask these deeper questions. I think we want to, create as big an umbrella as we possibly can, get people involved, just get people into this world, and then, start asking these questions once you're there and you're starting to understand things. But like you said, like it can be really overwhelming. You throw like all this stuff, all these concepts at people all at once. And one of the things we talk about a lot is, at least when you're starting, it's like, don't let the good be the enemy of the perfect. Like, start somewhere. Plant a native plant. Just start. And then we can evolve and we can grow, and this journey that we're on maybe we get to that place where we're growing like all seed grown, locally native plants. Like we're doing, we're growing in milk jugs. We're doing the thing. We've killed our lawns. It's like, and maybe that's where that's the gold standard. That's where we really want people to get to. But I think we do have to start them somewhere, and I really see the trials as that being a strength of the trials, is getting people's feet in the door. Showing people the diversity of all these plants that are out there. I think that's where I have the most fun. Just seeing that spark of excitement of people, being inspired by the beauty of these native plants and the value of native plants, which is, it's the whole thing. Anyways, it's exciting. Get it?
Oh yes, it is very exciting, and I agree. I mean, definitely want to get that spark. Don't let the perfect stop you.
Right.
Do what you can where you're at now.
Right.
I will be the first to admit I don't have all native plants on my property.
Me neither.
Not everything is local. Not all of my native plants are local genetics even.
Right.
Because I can't get local genetics for everything I want. I mean, I've tried to keep it at least within a neighboring state for the genetics. I try not to go too far. But I've still got plants that have that genetics because I bought them before I started thinking about that stuff.
Right.
And I haven't pulled them up.
Right.
Because I like them and they do some good.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's get started. And I think the trial gardens that you guys do are amazing at that. So I will have a link to the latest report, the Solidago report, in the show notes in the description for anybody that wants to go back there and look at it. And yeah, you guys do such an excellent job with that.
Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it.
And in the next episode, we're going to kind of dig into that report and learn about which species performed really well and some things to consider potentially when growing goldenrods in your garden. So thanks so much for being a guest on the Backyard Ecology Podcast and for sharing your knowledge with our listeners. And talk to you more in the next episode.
Absolutely. My pleasure, and anytime.
And if you'd like to learn more about those goldenrod apple galls that Sam and I talked about, then check out this short video. And don't forget to take some time to enjoy the nature in your yard and community.